It is a pleasure and a big responsibility to be here today at this IDB's Research Network seminar of the project. For the purpose of the present project, we have generated an interdisciplinary virtual team integrated by Venezuelan scientists, but from different organizations and locations. Luis Ordóñez, myself, coordinator, original biochemist, and now in management in Venezuela. Eliet Diaz in management in USA. Yajaira Freites, sociologist and historian in Venezuela. Mónica Garcia Perez, economist in USA. Jose Pineda, also an economist in Canada. And Jaime Riquena, a biologist in Spain. Also counting on technical support of Carmen Trujillo, journalism in Venezuela, Zuli Del Fiaco, education in Venezuela, and Zuli Romero, psychologist in Mexico. We thought and became interested about the need for this project after learning the dramatic decline in presentations at the annual meeting of the Venezuelan Association for the Advancement of Science, ASOVAC, which goes from well over 1,500 per year in the period 1995 to 2005 to less than 200 in the last 3 years. This decline is paralleled by a simultaneous rise in the number of scientists living in the country, as may be appreciated in the figure at the right side of the slide. After reading the work by Shin and Moon titled From Brain Drain to Brain Circulation and Linkage, we define the final aim of the project as to develop social capital in the migrant Venezuelan academic community in order to incorporate it in developmental undertakes needed by the country. At this point, it must be clarified that brain drain, migrant scientists, and scientific diasporas are three concepts linked respectively to different ideological perspectives that designate the same phenomenon, Tigao 2010. Within these visions, the idea of turning the resulting loss of human capital into social capital gains remains attractive to those of us who believe in the need of evidence for the definition of public policy that contribute to the socioeconomic development of a country. As it was mentioned in the proposal, the role of professional associations might be important behind the creation of research networks. Although the situation in Venezuela is not new, it is only now that ASOVAC is facing the problem, after one member of our research team just days ago at this year's annual meeting of the association proposed, and it was approved, the creation of international ASOVAC to foster networks with the Venezuelan scientific diaspora and to incorporate its members to the scientific and technological activities that are still being developed in the country. However, this situation is not new to Latin America. Either for economical reasons or for political ones, many scientists have migrated, leading to a situation that now, seen in perspective, may provide ideas about sound public policies to deal with the Venezuelan case. Learning from successes and failures may be possible by studying the available literature on the different experiences of the Latin American countries, which is put together in the table. A total of 12 projects from 10 countries is being analyzed to generate an evidence-based decision tree which, together with other results from the project, may lead to policies to attempt to handle the problem. For this purpose, ASOVAC is inviting Interciencia Association, a federation of associations for the advancement of science of the Americas, to join efforts to study what is being done, both at the professional associations level, like those interacting in Interciencia, or at the government agencies in charge of scientific development in Latin American countries. In order to characterize the migrant Venezuelan scientific community, we have leaned on Biblios, which is a database raised by one member of our team that compiles the bibliographic information of almost all major research work done in Venezuela, published in local or foreign academic peer-reviewed journals, from the early years of the last century up to 2018. Biblius is as well a software with analysis and graphic capabilities that responds to simple SQL language commands. It can construct networks of cooperation or deliver quantitative information on domestic foreign production of Venezuelan researchers. Queries are segmentable over parameters such as authorship, gender, time frame, or knowledge specialty. We have a total of 17,970 researchers who published during the years 1960 to 2017. For our analysis, we consider two types of Venezuelan researchers: non-immigrant and immigrants. Non-immigrant are researchers who are still in Venezuela, while immigrants are those who have left the country at any point of our period of analysis, 1960 to 2017. More than 80% of our sample of researchers are identified as non-immigrant. This is consistent with the historical trend of low immigration trend in Venezuela until recently. This table shows that what we will define as the indicators accounting for researchers' productivity and professional network. The first column shows that immigrant researchers publish their first paper at an earlier age than non-immigrant. Immigrants published around a quarter of a paper per year above non-immigrants on average, and a larger proportion of their papers are identified as high quality, about 20 percentage points. Although the number of co-authors is slightly higher for immigrant researchers on average, the two groups have the same median number of co-authors per year. Immigrant researchers are more likely to work with foreign, over 10 percentage points more likely, and other immigrant researchers twice as likely on average, 7% versus 15% respectively, and more likely to publish with interdisciplinary colleagues, 3 percentage points. The sample of never-immigrant researchers is evenly distributed about gender, while the sample of immigrant researchers is biased towards men. Notice that researchers with a doctorate degree are overrepresented above or among the immigrant researchers. Most of the immigrant researchers emigrated from the year 2000 and forward, particularly important since 2014. Among the top immigration countries, we observe the usual magnet destinations for general Venezuelan migration. However, it seems that countries like Ecuador, Canada, and France are more significant in terms of proportions of immigrants among the scientific community. Meanwhile, countries like Chile and Panama, although being top magnets for Venezuelan immigrants, do not mimic this distribution among researchers. There is a stylized fact evidence that migration patterns among Venezuelan researchers are different to the average population. Immigrants are more likely to be in technology and pure sciences. Those disciplines with asterisk are significantly overrepresented in the immigrant group. Most of the researchers are affiliated to universities. Notice, however, that the institution Energy and Oil is significantly overrepresented in the migrant group. The political tensions that originated after the oil industry strike may have created a push factor for the researchers in the industry. This should be explored later on. Now we move to the section related to knowledge creation and productivity. Given that our data set is the best guess we have about the population of researchers in the country, at its best, this dataset contains a very diverse set of researchers across disciplines and organizations. Also, it offers a consistent comparison pool given the source of the information. Due to the lack of a population estimate, our results are analyzed and weighted. Both immigrants and non-immigrants will be subject to similar bias in the selection of the sample. Measurement errors could exist, but they are not expected to be systematically connected to the status of the researcher. We assume that researchers face a production function of knowledge creation identified by the research they can publish. The production of knowledge is a function of their own human capital, their professional network of co-authors, and the overall access to resources in the country. To account for the difference between quality versus quantity, we not only look as a dependent variable at the average number of papers per year, but also at the share of high-quality published papers per year. The level of observation is author publication year. The control variables list includes whether the person emigrated that publication year, the author emigrated at some point in our time series period, emigrant, the average share of Venezuelan co-authors per year, the emigration rate of researchers in other disciplines at one-digit level. The more granular disaggregation separate disciplines that are closely related in terms of research resources. Research sex, age at first paper, change of Venezuela GDP, year fixed effects, system fixed effects, discipline fixed effects, one digit. Immigrant researchers are on average more productive in terms of number and quality of papers than never immigrant researchers. After emigrated, immigrant researchers produce fewer publications on average per year. However, there is no evidence of reducing the number of high-quality papers share. The share of Venezuelan co-author increases the average number of papers by zero point 0.1, but the net effect is negative for migrant researchers. However, it reduces the share of high-quality papers by zero point 0.2 on average, but this last effect is lessened among immigrant researchers, as we can see for the effect from the interaction terms. A similar pattern is observed with respect to interdisciplinary collaboration. Immigrant researchers are less impacted by the negative effect of collaboration with authors from other disciplines than never immigrant researchers. Although not the goal of this draft presentation, this difference in the impact of collaboration shares could be driven by the type of networking that immigrants and never immigrants develop during the professional life cycle. Networking outside their disciplines could be used as a tool to have access to higher productive researchers from those other disciplines. The rate of emigration outside own discipline impacts differently immigrants and never immigrants. It appears like the exodus of interdisciplinary potential collaborators increases the average production of high quality papers among never immigrant researchers. There could be two forces, lower local competition or collaborators with more resources outside the country. But this effect is reduced to zero among immigrant researchers. Like in the literature of individual choice, immigrants are likely to self-select into migration. In our analysis, that raises endogeneity issues in terms of productivity and sample distribution changes due to emigration of researchers. For instance, if more productive researchers are the ones more likely to migrate, but their productivity is due to the final outcome of migration, we not only have a problem in the general sense of selection bias, but also an issue of reverse causality. Being an immigrant identifies those who are more productive, because those who are more productive are so because they want to emigrate. In this sense, their decisions on publications and use of professional networks will depend on their final goal of emigration. In the case of Venezuela, emigration is a very modern concept. Although we don't do a sophisticated analysis of the emigration rate across years among researchers, the increase of emigration among researchers mimics the emigration rate of the total population. Historically, Venezuela has been a country with a very low immigration rate. The new phenomenon has been present as a significant rate since 2014. However, that doesn't mean that the immigration rate was zero before this critical point, nor it says that researchers were not able to find better opportunities abroad, outside Venezuela. In fact, it says that there is a chance that the immigration push and pull factors may have changed across cohorts. Due to the lack of quantitative data on the reasons to migrate, we explore these topics in the more qualitative data. Our section on selectivity uses a logic model to estimate the likelihood to migrate, conditional on authors' characteristics, professional network, access to resources, and fixed effects indicators. Notice the selection that we were able to identify here is conditional on the observable across authors. Given the lack of an experimental design in our analysis, we are not able to identify the selectivity on unobservables. Considering our limitation, using this preliminary analysis, we can observe that researchers are more likely to migrate if collaborators have already migrated, while there are lower odds to migrate as the share of Venezuelan co-authors increases. Interesting fact, as researchers publish for the first time later in their life, they are also less likely to emigrate. Note that we refer interchangeably about authors in the following way: emigrated or emigrant authors, and non-emigrated or never emigrant authors. In terms of the average number of publications, emigrants and never emigrants were not different in terms of their productivity until mid-90s, when emigrated became statistically significantly less productive until 2014, when the trend reversed. As we can see in the figure, the quality of the papers may be playing a role. It is worth to notice that the patterns of publications per year of those who emigrated versus those who stayed in the country were very similar before 1995. Thereafter, the number of publications of those who emigrated were significantly lower than those who stayed in Venezuela. This pattern continued until 2015. As we know, in academia, the publications production in terms of numbers could be misleading. This is why we show this pattern looking at the share of high quality papers in the next slide. Despite the lower number of papers published per year, emigrant researchers had a larger proportion of high-quality published papers than never emigrant researchers. That became statistically significant from the year 2000 and forward. The second source of information for characterizing the Venezuelan scientific migrant population was the result as a survey questionnaire of questions presented to that population. This instrument was aimed to update the information from the original Biblios database until 2018 and also to identify academic and social networks in terms of the demographic, academic, cultural, and social characteristics of the same. Ostrom and Ann, 2003, theoretical approaches on social capital and collective action were assumed for the construction of the survey. It specifically seeks to measure the variables demographic characteristics, migration process and other contextual variables, human capital, social capital, bridging are all the academic networks and institutions that tend bridges between researchers, and social capital bonding, which means which include all social and family networks that link researchers with their relatives. Also, the goal behind the analysis of these questions and models is to establish a more sophisticated evaluation of the relationship between emigration of high-skilled individuals and the change of knowledge productivity in Venezuela. Trust and collaboration, motivational campaign for participation in the survey was needed. With the purpose of guaranteeing the highest possible number of responses, we designed a promotional campaign to motivate Venezuelan researchers to participate in the study. On the one hand, we generated a series of press releases that were distributed on social networks and the media at the beginning of the process before launching the online survey and at the beginning of the launching period. In parallel, we developed a social network in Facebook together with our own blogs, Interconectados and Asovac, to reinforce the message of the importance of answering the surveys, to spread notice to other researchers they know or inquire for it in case of not having received it. We initiated the survey distribution by the end of October and proceeded during the month of November. The sample of researchers contacted were those who were in Biblios, and we had their email information. The scheme utilized for the generation of the survey items on the questionnaire can be seen in the graphic. On it, we asked for research characteristics, education, networks between researchers in Venezuela and other countries, factors that contribute to the development of professional and social networks of migrated researchers, and migration process and contextual variables, with detailed questioning in each point. Although both samples are independent, Biblios and survey, the sample of authors responding to questions shares some key characteristics with those on Biblios, as shown in the table. Responses are biased towards migrated authors, 67.37%, which is the opposite case of Biblios, 91.9% authors in Venezuela and 9.1 migrated authors. Top destinations are similar to Biblios. Notice that we do not have information of country of destination for one survey. Gender distribution is even for authors in Venezuela, but biased towards men for migrated authors. This is similar to Biblios, although less severe, 50.7% for authors in Venezuela and 57.8% for migrated authors. Most authors are associated with a university, similar to Biblios, 91% in Venezuela and 67.6% for migrated authors. Authors in Venezuela tend to be older than migrated authors, similar to Biblios. Average age of 43.78 years for authors in Venezuela and 41.71 years for migrated authors. However, the survey respondents are statistically significant older than the ones in Biblios. We were able to reach an older cohort through the survey than the full sample of Venezuelan researchers. The distribution of maximum grades is biased towards authors with doctorate. The share of authors with doctorate is higher for migrated authors, similar to Biblios, although in Biblios these shares are significantly smaller, 18.8% for authors in Venezuela and 31.5% for migrated authors. This is not as surprising as it appears, given our tools to connect to respondents, which is emails. Our original sample has individual emails that in several cases are connected to their professional life. We are more likely to find connections with those who still practice or maintain their connection with their professional networks. There are linkages in the Venezuelan research community. Around 40% of authors in Venezuela have linkages abroad. Similarly, around 40% of authors migrated have linkages in Venezuela. When comparing across groups, we find no statistically significant difference in the formation of linkages abroad. The top left graph shows that the majority of authors have a doctorate, and the majority of authors with a doctorate have contacts abroad. This is mostly significant for those authors abroad, since every migrated author with contacts in Venezuela has a doctorate. The bottom left graph shows that the share of younger authors is significantly higher for those authors that migrated. Younger authors from 31 to 50 years have less connections abroad. This is statistically significant only for migrated authors. The top right graph shows the share of authors in Venezuela with linkages abroad is significantly higher for those that speak another language. Finally, differences are not statistically significant for the type of area of research measured by the UNESCO classification for all authors regardless of their location. With a significant higher share for authors in Venezuela, productivity is the reason of why researchers work with authors in Venezuela. For migrated authors, mobility and contacts in Venezuela is the reason of why researchers work with authors in Venezuela. Despite the bias in our survey sample, these survey results mimic the impact of some of the findings in our productivity models. Access, visibility, and even productivity are not the main reasons for Venezuelan researchers abroad to collaborate with researchers in Venezuela. We showed before that the share of Venezuelan co-authors statistically significantly reduced the likelihood of producing high-quality papers. We could speculate that the mobility component that is identified as a main reason for linkages with Venezuelan researchers incorporates reasons beyond the professional life, such as family, friends, and familiarity, among others. For authors in Venezuela, mobility and contacts, although not statistically distinguishable from exchange, networking, and access, is the reason with a significantly higher share of why researchers work with authors abroad. This is expected because networks and mobility are highly correlated, especially if networks are tools used for mobility. For migrated authors, mobility, although not statistically distinguishable from exchange, networking, and productivity, is the reason with a significantly higher share of why researchers work with the authors abroad. There is a difference in the incentive to work with authors abroad if the author is in Venezuela. Productivity, while for migrated authors is to have mobility and contacts in Venezuela, no productivity, which is consistent with what we saw to be the case in the empirical analysis with Biblios. When working with authors in other countries, the incentive is the same for all authors, either Venezuela or migrated, which is to say, to have mobility and contacts. The graph on the left shows that close to half of authors in Venezuela belong to ASOVAC, while over 40% of migrated authors were associated with ASOVAC. Close to half of authors linked to ASOVAC in Venezuela have linkages abroad, while close to half of migrated authors that were linked to ASOVAC have contacts in Venezuela. So, although there is some association, ASOVAC is not a decisive factor since differences are not statistically significant. For authors in Venezuela, participation in ASOVAC mostly happens on national conventions, while for migrated authors, participation happens on national conventions and publications in Acta Científica. The graph at the right shows that most of migrated authors would like to maintain contact with ASOVAC. This is true for most migrated authors, not just for those with linkages to ASOVAC. There are no significant differences across groups. Less than half of authors associated with ASOVAC wish to return. Then it seems to make sense to have an international chapter of ASOVAC, given willingness to participate expressed by all migrated authors and how unlikely is the return of previous ASOVAC members. Migrated authors mostly work in their field, particularly when migrated to Latin America and Oceania, but only one observation there. The share in Latin America is statistically significantly higher than in North America and Europe. Notice that the share in North America is statistically higher than Europe. These patterns could explain the reason for countries like Ecuador appearing in the list of top 4 hub countries receiving Venezuelan researchers. Most of the migrated authors are working on their field of expertise. The more or less Venezuelans are in networks abroad, the more or less likely a migrated author will not be working on the same field. Older migrated authors are more likely not to be working on their field in another country. It also seems to be the case that it is associated with the migration in the latest period, while planning migration is significantly linked to working on the same field. Economical, political, and all combined economic, political, and social reasons have similar shares regardless if a migrated author is working on the same field. However, for those working on the same field, work-related causes represent close to half of their answers as the main reason to migrate. The lower share of researchers working on the same field in Europe is related to age. It seems to be the case that older researchers are mostly not working on their field in Europe. Notice that Europe has the same number of older migrated researchers than North America, but only 40% is working in the same field, while in North America this share is 72%. Latin America has the higher number of older migrated researchers, but the share there is over 90%, so it is an issue that the age and region of migration is related to these results. To summarize the results, differences in the share of authors working on the same field are statistically significant. It is important to mention the magnifying role of planning on these effects, which can be seen when comparing across those migrated authors that planned their migration and those that did not. This is particularly important for those migrants for which their networks are formed mostly by non-Venezuelans, older migrants, those that migrated after 2013, and those that did not have a work-related reason to migrate. Related to the relationship between the age and the region of migration, older migration has a higher share of migrants, which is particularly true for Europe. This region in particular has the highest share of older migrants after 2013, close to 86%. Just over than half of migrated authors would like to return, although there is no significant difference by working on the same field. The cohort more willing to return, even if working in the same field, has an age ranging from 51 to 60, but that difference is not statistically significant. Those migrated authors that explicitly mentioned economic or political causes are less likely to return. Those migrated authors with families not migrated are more likely to return. In addition, those whose family has not integrated are more likely to return, while recent migrants are more likely to wish to return. Among those migrants that wish to share the Venezuelan culture, the intention to return is higher, statistically significant at 10%. Most migrants only speak Spanish at home. 83% only speak Spanish, while less than 1% does not speak Spanish at all. Those that only speak Spanish show a statistically significant share of researchers wishing to return. To summarize the results, all differences in the share of authors wishing to return to Venezuela are statistically significant, except only speaking Spanish at home, which is done by most migrants. Migrants to Latin American countries are more likely to return. Most migrants want to share the Venezuelan culture to descendants, regardless of their intention of returning, 81%. However, those that wish to share the Venezuelan culture have a higher intention to return, statistically significant at 10%. The evaluation of the impact of emigration in the Venezuelan academy and the generation of alternatives to convert the losses of human capital into social capital gains contemplates the realization of a phenomenological phase that will complement the quantitative study. The key informants will be the 122 researchers who answered the first questionnaire and who expressed interest in continuing to be contacted for the second phase of the study. The open response questionnaire will be administered online using an open response Google form from December 15, 2019 until January 15, 2020. The objective in the qualitative study is to analyze the migration factors, current conditions, interests, and possibilities of Venezuelan researchers who migrated between 2008 and 2018 for the generation of actions for the construction of social capital. The open response questionnaire is divided into three predetermined categories. Their respective basic questions are: for the CIFID migration factors and residential destination, First, what are the reasons that led to emigrate? What was the main need that motivated the decision? Second, why to choose a specific country to settle and make a new life? What attracted to that country? For the actual situation, we will ask, third, how to describe the current situation, labor, professional, and social. Fourth, how have you built professional ties in the new country? How did you link to your current job? How did you establish contact? And fifth, at this time, what advantages or disadvantages do you identify about your immigration decision? And the sixth is section number C, interest and possibilities of linking. Six, what does it mean for you to belong to academic networks that support scientific activity in Venezuela? How do you think you could collaborate with science in Venezuela? What will be your level of commitment? And eighth, what means do you use to contact Venezuela? Why? Given the findings in the literature of differential approaches to the understanding of the migration experience dependent upon the different continents where the Latin American professionals migrate, TIGAO 2013, and our own results pointing to differences in migrant experiences according to their final destiny, the analysis of any data obtained from the qualitative study will be done either as a lump sum or segmented by region of migration. We may not expect the development of social capital and its successful funneling for the country's development to be due to scientists alone. Other actors beyond the scientific community, such as scientific societies, NGOs, government, business, professional organizations, and society at large, will also play a role. However, the productivity, age, and migrated place seem to play roles that must be studied in order to define future public policies to promote and increase such social capital. Such policies will have to distinguish among bridging social capital, which supports the scientific activity of the country, and bonding social capital, indicators that point to trust between actors and reciprocity, language and cultural adaptation, technological resources, and access to information. Brain drain, a metaphor that emerged in the United Kingdom in 1957, Rand 1957, a vision where the professionals are human capital in which states have invested and which therefore should not be lost, has evolved into the diaspora metaphor, understood as the movement, migration, or scattering of a people away from established or ancestral homeland. From this, Maslow's theory of motivation, Tigao 2013, and Elias' figurational sociology, Alcalde and Campos 2011, as well as the social networks and the academic social networking services brought by ICTs, Bardaki et al. 2018, may be guides in completing this endeavor. Also, in order for the diaspora to benefit his country of origin, it will have to fulfill other characteristics mentioned by Eastman, 2009. A. Maintain a transnational existence, come and go between its country of origin and destination in order to facilitate tacit knowledge transactions, understood as all forms of interpersonal knowledge exchanges and learning. Williams, 2007. And B. Serve economic interests and education in their home country. Models as the one after the Russian study of Shirvayev and Oshkot 2019 may also be helpful. All will have to be included in the remaining part of our study. I would like to present to you the bibliography mentioned in the presentation in case anyone is interested. Thank you for your attention.